Eddie Shore, better known as Old Blood and Guts and the unstoppable Edmonton Express, stands alone as the only defenseman to capture 4 Hart Trophies while spearheading the Boston Bruins to Stanley Cup glory in 1929 and 1939. Raised on a windswept Saskatchewan ranch, Shore blended prairie-tough stamina with a visionary sense of puck movement, racking up 551 NHL games, 105 goals, and a then unthinkable 1,099 penalty minutes. His devastating hits, mirror-like stretch passes, and the infamous Ace Bailey collision, catalyst for the NHL's first All-Star game, rewrote what a blue liner could be. From pioneering end-to-end rushes to coining the term Black Aces, Shore's fingerprints still mark every modern power play and neutral zone trap. Dive into this 3,000-word deep dive to relive the ferocity, brilliance, and enduring impact of hockey's most compelling pre-war icon. Steam rolled across the vast Saskatchewan prairie in the winter months of 1919, and at dawn, the only sustained sound besides wind was the sharp bark of steel blades biting into outdoor ice a few yards behind the Shore family ranch. Eddie, lean, long-legged, and already carrying himself with a ranch hand's purposeful stride, skated determined figure eights until the rising sun bled pink over the horizon and his eyelashes froze together. The rituals were simple. Finish morning chores, lash on mismatched boots with hand-sharpened blades, and chase a chunk of frozen horsehide until fingers went numb. Over 4 years, he graduated from tin can pucks to real rubber, from pickup shinny to the rough-edge Cooper Canucks, and finally to the Melville Millionaires, forging quick lateral cuts by racing coyotes along fence lines and developing bone-deep balance by riding half-wild broncos through knee-deep drifts. When Melville shocked the province by taking the 1923-24 senior championship, the legend reached trainline card games and grain exchange cafes across Western Canada. A teenager out of Fort Q Appel could throw a hip harder than a territorial police constable and shoot a puck as flat as a prairie horizon. Professional offers arrived pinned inside envelopes still smelling of cigar smoke. The first yes came from the Regina Capitals of the Western Canada Hockey League. In the fall of 1924, Shore boarded a drafty second-class coach, the only luggage a duffel stuffed with stitched-up pads, 2 patch sweaters, and a pair of spurs, keepsake of ranch mornings he refused to abandon. Regina installed him at right wing, but the Capitals staggered through a miserable season, finishing in the cellar while Shore collected 6 goals, a half-dozen fines for wild boarding majors, and whispers that his true calling might lie 20 feet closer to his own net. Coach Ken McKenzie of the Edmonton Eskimos needed muscle on the blue line and had heard the rumors. Shore skated like he'd swallowed a metronome, swung his hips like a plow horse flipping sod, and possessed enough unrefined anger to turn every corner into a controlled blast site. Mid-practice in the fall of 1925, McKenzie tugged Shore aside, pointed to the defensive zone, and ordered him to claim it as personal acreage. The experiment ignited immediately. Shore discovered the thrill of absorbing a rush, stealing the puck, and ransacking 90 feet of ice before rivals could reverse momentum. Reporters, tough, ink-stained veterans who measured adjectives in dollars per column inch, latched onto a new moniker the first night he skated coast to coast: the Edmonton Express, a human locomotive in leather straps. The following spring, Western professional hockey buckled under financial strain. Owners in Boston, New York, and Detroit smelled opportunity, and Charles Adams of the Boston Bruins, flush from grocery chain profits, wired $50,000 to seize a 7-player bundle headlined by Shore. In Prohibition-era terms, it was the equivalent of purchasing an entire downtown block, and skeptics called the gamble fiscal insanity, until the puck dropped on the Bruins' 1926-27 schedule. Boston Garden's inaugural hush broke the first time Shore's blade struck the boards. He took the opening face-off in his own zone, harvested the puck with a flick of his stick, slalomed through neutral traffic as though weaving cattle between corral rails, and launched a waist-high wrister that cannoned off the crossbar loud enough to jumpstart a new fan base. By season's end, he had posted 12 goals, 18 points, and a ferocious 130 penalty minutes in 41 games, dragging Boston from mediocrity to a runner-up finish in the American Division. Year 2 exploded like prairie dynamite. Shore racked up 165 penalty minutes, an NHL record, while hurtling from blue line to goal line on 4- and 5-minute shifts. Newspapers, abandoning genteel Edwardian prose, coined old blood and guts after a night in Montreal when Shore flung 2 Canadians over the boards on consecutive shifts, then threaded a tape-to-tape breakout pass from behind his own net to set up the winner. He toggled between intimidation and orchestration with dizzying speed. Opponents sometimes looked frozen, not from fear of impact, but sheer indecision about which version of Shore might materialize next. The 1928 to 1929 campaign crowned the first summit. With Shore quarterbacking breakouts and swatting intruders clear of the slot, Boston ripped through the schedule, then suffocated New York and held Montreal to a single goal across 2 Stanley Cup final matches. 12 regular season goals from a defenseman seemed near sorcery for the period. Still more shocking was the sense he could switch entire game moods with a shoulder and a glare. Boston's inaugural Stanley Cup sparked parades, triggered restaurant price spikes, and converted countless baseball loyalists into winter diehards. If championship banners marked triumph, scars brand permanence. Late in 1929, tempers flared at practice after veteran Billy Coutu aimed elbows at Shore's jaw. A full-speed collision shredded most of Shore's left ear. Blood soaked the ice while teammates gagged, yet Shore marched unassisted to the dressing room infirmary, declined anesthetic, demanded a mirror, and oversaw the sewing of 12 monstrous stitches. He rejoined scrimmage 48 hours later, a macabre origin story that teams recited to rookies whenever they reached for smelling salts. Through the early 30s, Shore's nightly stat lines veered from violent opera to calculating symphony. He reached 30-plus points twice, an unfathomable haul from the blue line in that decade, while maintaining penalty totals heavy enough to tilt the rink. Forwards crossing his territory described hearing wind whistle past their ear before feeling his hip pivot skyward. Simultaneously, he plotted breakouts with almost mathematical patience, banking passes off end boards so they arrived at a winger's tape like a billiard shot, called 3 rails in advance. December 12, 1933, delivered the darkest episode. At Maple Leaf Gardens, Toronto, Bruins defenseman King Clancy upended Shore with a hip check. Momentarily concussed, Shore staggered upright and hurtled after the wrong Leaf, star forward Ace Bailey, driving him headfirst to the ice. Bailey's skull fractured, his body convulsed. Maple Leaf enforcer Red Horner hammered Shore unconscious with a retaliatory punch. In hospital corridors, surgeons fought to save Bailey's life, while Shore faced suspension and moral indictment. League president Frank Calder imposed a 16-game ban. Toronto's owners, channeling vengeance into benevolence, organized a fundraising exhibition that united league stars in February 1934. Bailey attended on crutches and shook Shore's hand at center ice before a hushed crowd, an uneasy tableau that simultaneously condemned and immortalized old blood and guts. The charity night drew such gate receipts that the NHL institutionalized the All-Star Game 13 years later, its origins forever tied to one brutal hit. Public ire gradually ceded to reluctant admiration. Between 1933 and 1938, Shore captured the Hart Trophy 4 times, a tally still unmatched by any defenseman. He captained Boston beginning in 1935, not because of locker room eloquence. He delivered pep talks and clipped ranch metaphors, but because teammates understood the quickest route to victory was to trail wherever he hacked a path. He played minutes that would send modern fitness coaches sputtering, 55, sometimes 58 out of 60. Emerging from end-board scrums, dripping sweat, yet somehow gliding into the next rush. Trainers joked his lungs were stitched from rubber inner tubes. At 36, most players faded into coaching or tavern folklore, but Shore stalked the 1938-39 schedule with undiminished menace, scoring 4 times, assisting on 14 more, and smothering Chicago and New York in the postseason, while Boston clutched its second Stanley Cup. That summer, believing the heroic arc complete, he purchased the Springfield Indians of the American Hockey League, intent on blending ownership with semi-retired shifts. Yet by January, an injury-ravaged Bruins blue line begged for reinforcements. Shore agreed to 4 home dates at $200 apiece, playing spot duty, then insisted on doubling roles with Springfield road games. Boston, unwilling, flipped him across the Hudson to the New York Americans. 10 final NHL games closed out a resume listing 551 appearances, 105 goals, 179 assists, and a thunderous 1,099 penalty minutes. Springfield became an authoritarian workshop. Shore acted as owner, player, general manager, ice maintenance supervisor, and occasional front gate ticket taker. Players scratched from the lineup spent mornings painting the boards or hammering. He christened these extras Black Aces, a poker riff on spare cards hidden up a sleeve. The term endures today for playoff practice squads. Under his command, the Indians lifted the Calder Cup in 1940 and rattled off 3 consecutive championships from 1960 through 1962, a feat still revered in minor league lore. Not all Springfield memories are painted in championship gold. In 1967, Shore suspended 3 players without pay for what he branded indifferent effort. The roster revolted, hired young labor lawyer Alan Eagleson, and forced Shore to cede daily control to the NHL expansion Los Angeles Kings. Historians pinpoint that standoff as the embryo of the NHL Players Association. Hockey's most notorious disciplinarian indirectly fathered the sport's collective bargaining movement, a twist Shore never fully embraced, though he grudgingly acknowledged the union's necessity decades later. Accolades stacked like cordwood. The Boston Garden lifted his number 2 to the rafters in 1947, mere months after his induction into the Hockey Hall of Fame's first post-war class. Canada's Sports Hall of Fame followed in 1975, and in 1970, the Lester Patrick Trophy honored his lifelong service to American hockey development. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts issued him the vanity license plate MR Hockey, and he drove a sky-blue Cadillac Coupe de Ville with that tag bolted proud, window cracked so pipe smoke could billow into the cold New England night. Statistics, when skimmed, paint Shore as a brute who happened to score. Deeper inspection reveals pioneering versatility. In an era dominated by dump and chase philosophy, he invented the stretch pass, banking pucks off neutral zone boards to spring wingers whom defensemen had led themselves susceptible by bracing for impact. Where others saw the blue line as defensive bunker, Shore saw runway. He would feather a puck to center ice, then trail the play as late support, effectively operating as a fourth forward and sewing architecture for Bobby Orr's future balletic flights. His ability to decode forecheck patterns in real time foreshadowed analytics decades before the word existed. Colleagues swore he could detect a winger's next move by the tightness of his glove wrap or the tilt of his left shoulder during back press. Influence radiated beyond systems and tactics. Shore turned intimidation into a marketable commodity. Ticket buyers flocked to witness collisions as much as goals. That fascination paid off mortgages for arena owners and accelerated professional hockey's expansion into U.S. cities, where ice had been nothing more than a novel. He also forced administrators into confrontations with the ethics of violence. After the Ace Bailey tragedy, league governors rewrote boarding regulations and installed clearer suspension protocols. Shore's 1930 flirtation with a boxing match against baseball brawler Art Shires triggered further debate about athlete crossovers and liability, debate that sharpened league policies on off-season risk-taking. Even the shape of conditioning owes him debt. He rode an exercise bike before practice, swung heavy ropes adapted from stable leads, and argued that a defenseman must build rope-swing shoulders to absorb checks and dish them out. Modern strength coaches would later christen these routines functional training. Shore invented them by repurposing farm tools. When liver cancer claimed him in March 1985, obituaries split between hagiography and admonition. Some eulogists recited trophy counts, others recounted broken noses and fractured ribs. Teammates toasted his ruthlessness in cramped taverns, while rivals traced finger-wide scars earned during net front wars. Yet every tribute converged on one essential truth. Hockey's pulse had once synchronized with Eddie Shore's uncompromising rhythm. Decades later, highlight packages replay open ice checks by Scott Stevens, blue line rushes by Paul Coffey, or Zdeno Chara's menacing stare. And Shore's fingerprints remain visible. Each time a defenseman sprints the length of the rink to turn defense into offense. Each time a slower forward hesitates along the boards because the back pressure feels personal. The ghost of old blood and guts drifts through the rafters. He demonstrated that greatness could be shaped by conflict rather than comfort, that artistry may spring from abrasion, and that a single personality, equal parts railroad steel and chessmaster patience, could haul an entire sport into its modern form. Tom Cavanagh's ripples traverse both, overlapping across generations of athletes who study the lines he sketched into frozen water and decide that greatness need not roar to resonate. Sometimes it hovers just above a whisper, brushing past, reminding anyone who listens that mastery shortens time, stretches numbers, and endures quietly in the rinks of memory.